Saturday, November 18 is the 40th anniversary date of the infamous Jonestown slaughter, wherever more than 900 human beings dead at a community run by believer worship leader Jim Jones. Precautionary, the paper contains graphics images of die increasing up in Washington, D.C. in the 1950s and 1960s. Laura Johnson was no unknown to militancy. By 1970, while she united the folk shrine in California elderly 22, she had already been teardrop gas deprecating versus the Vietnam warfare, treated in the Dark Panthers, and visited the renowned 1969 Woodstock Fest. My lifetime was in confusion. I had an unsuccessful wedding and I was looking for a location to be policy in a more secure environmental following a episode of bad decisions, she recalls. She visited a few meetings at the team's staff in Mahogany Vale in Northern California and was quickly won above by their ideals of kindness and race equity. Jim Jones, a charisma believer evangelist, had set up the Human Beings' Shrine as a racially integrated chapel team in Indianapolis in 1956, up moving to California 10 years after. Jones told of an imminent nuke apocalypse, and believed his separatist fighter apostolate socialistic society could flourish in the ramifications. The team, though sectarian, was based on socialistic ideals, provided health and some public services for its various members. It was the society I was looking for. I was looking for equity and judiciary, and down there were human beings of all backgrounds and races, Laura says. In 1974, the worship leader Jim Jones told he requested us to discover a location off of all the drugs and alcoholic in America, she recalls. We found Guyana, in Southward America. That was the ultimate nation for us to go to. It was a nice nation in remotely areas how we could inhabit. In 1977, Laura and hundreds of others uprooted their lives to de-settle at the Human Beings' Shrine agriculture draft, unofficially named as Jonestown following its leader's behalf. I had no concerns on driving down there. I was brave and I was impressed on the prospect to dwell in the rainforest, she says. The socialistic heaven overseas would enable Jones and his team to practice their way of lifetime off of the intensive print study how was start to accumulate behind in California. But it wasn't the full heaven they were pledged. The community, in the polar of the Guyana, was unusually remotely but became tortured by agriculture deficiencies how prevented the team of creature personality sufficient. Members lived along in little common houses, and informed work length days in stifling warmth for their more politicized everyday lives. Laura lived at the major Jonestown website before October 1978. My job down there was significant and carrying, she recalls. This human beings of folk shrine were who I requested to dwell my entire lifetime in. They were beautiful human beings. Some survivors might say otherwise, but for me, I was impressed. It was not an unfortunate portion of my lifetime. At the end of October, Laura was requested by Jones to go to Georgetown, the Guyanese Equity, a 24-time ship trip off, to job at the chapel staff. She believes her resettlement was a intended go by Jones, driven on sense of increasing study and an imminent trip by California Congresswoman Leo Ryan. Jim Jones looked at zealots love Laura, human beings who would say favorably on Human Beings' Shrine, and packed the Sundeck in Georgetown for Congresswoman Ryan's trip, she says. The political figure was header up an investigative mission to the connection following household members in the U.S. pronounced anxiety their favorite ones were creature detained versus their will. In one top-profile instance, the deserter parents of a kid named John Victor Stone, who Jones declared he had fathered, openly battled for guardianship. And meantime, Laura recalls, Jim Jones's country of reason was worsening and the Jonestown experimental was start to failure. Human beings were charging Jim Jones of stealing their family, and his secretaries had run off in outrageous data on which was departure at. In May 1978, an assistant shut to Jones, Deborah Layton Blakey, escaped to Georgetown to search shelter at the US legation. She as well informed how connection residents incurred meal shortages and were at times tortured by illnesses like diarrhea. Jonestown wasn't set up for so lot human beings, we were 1,000, and we were not personality sufficient. So Jim Jones was sense the blood pressure, Laura recalls. It's narcotic drug addiction and his identity disorders were received worst. He was less than and less than capable to feature. Survivors withdrawn, whites overnight events, occasionally weak, wherever Jones would announce a meltdown on the connection's security. Occasionally these implicated scoff massive suicides wherever followers, consisting family, on the lining up and drank fluid they were said was laced in venom, just to be said it was a testing of customer loyalty. While Congresswoman Ryan attended in a deputation in November, he driven on worried loved ones of Shrine members and journalists to paper the travel. Following original impedance, the team were allowed accessing and taking into account tours that introduced a substantially enjoyable picture of daily lifetime. Charles Krause, a Washington Position interviewer on the travel, would remember, opposite to which the worried loved ones had said us, no seemed to be hungry, everyone seemed rather wholesome. The team stayed external of the connection night and refundable the following date. For their period down there, the team were close by at low a half a dozen followers request to back to the US in them. As the deputation waited for their back flying, a group of Shrine armed people ambushed the team and outdoor flame, murder 5 human beings consisting Congresswoman Ryan. Behind at the connection, Jones at once forced his more than rather than 900 followers to get their own lives, precautionary how the Guyanese war would intrude and get their family since of the runway survey. Vats of harvest toddy laced in potassium cyanide were blended and allocated about, as in the rehearsals. Jim Jones was a con painter, he done everyone since he was their dad, Laura says of the lead. He would say to them, thou can't go behind, you include no cash, that was real. They had put it all in the chapel. They afraid repercussions of the die of the Congresswoman, she says. He lied to them each day, he fed them paranoid. They had no regress. Behind at the Guyana Steph 150 miles, 240 km, off, members were warned to the procedure. Jim Jones's secretariat, Sharon Amos, acquired a communication on the wireless ship to Georgetown, San Francisco and Mahogany Vale, Laura recalls. It told, all in Jonestown is moribund or corpse. All else as necessary to perpetrate revolutionist suicidal order currently. We are all making order currently. Laura says 2 of Jones' family, who were newcomer the equity as portion of the Shrine's basketball game crew, rejected to pursue instructions and said some branch to neglect them. She had been out of the house while the communication arriving, and refundable to discover Guyanese domestic defense forces earning out the flesh bags for the secretariat and her family. It's difficult to aware which would include happened if I and the other in Georgetown had acquired such instructions, she says. We had options down there, you could go downward the road and see human beings, get in a vehicle, or get in an legation. I believe if I were in Jonestown and I saw 900 human beings who I favorite do a selection, I can't think needing to pull through how. Laura says behind at the staff, they began to listen accountable on the die duty at Jonestown, at first proverb 300 corpse, later 600. We were fair all desolate. We were weeping, love I yet cry currently. I was a chaos. Lot of us were disconsolate, she says. Several human beings went out to try to identification several of the human beings. Their bodies were leftward out in the outdoor, in the medium of the rainforest, in a overseas nation. Each probable item how could be botched, was botched. Down there is no actual way to aware precisely who dead how. It was fair terrible. The definitive die duty, consisting the runway killings and Jones oneself, totaled 918 human beings. Krause, who kept the weight and was the at first reporter permitted on the stage of the slaughter, told how the dogs and the Jonestown pet chimp dead near the residence. Up the events of 11 September 2001, Jonestown was the greatest solitary occurrence of deliberate citizen die in us story. Laura refundable to the U.S. at the end of November 1978 and excited behind in the Human Beings' Shrine Society in California, a judgment how she says she had no qualms on. They were my household. I had lived in them for 8 years, I knew them so closely, she says. I never had any fears. Jim Jones was the just one who was nested in the deaths. We had lost via the joint injury along. And it done feeling to go via the medicinal along. My mom and sibling could not know how I had gotten in the shrine, how I stayed above down there, they couldn't get it. They couldn't understand the losing. Following a year behind at the Human Beings' Shrine, Laura united L's society wherever she met her man and lived for 10 years wherever they had a son along. Later I told, I'm made, I wish to be an age currently. I went behind to high school, and I begun training in 1995, Laura says. Possessing avoiding speaking on the trauma expertise for nearly too many decades, Laura ultimately met up in Shrine Survivors for the At First period in 1998. Down there had been no message board to include adverse discussions before later, she says. 20 years after, we could eventually sit downward in a round and include a talk on which happened. The injury of work out the minority group who had lived became traumatizing and insurmountable, so on encounter UPS she found herself amazed to face human beings she did not aware had done it of. The anniversary date, November 18th, has be a day for her and other to honor the more than rather than 900 lives how were lose. Meet these some human beings for these anniversaries has helping me restore my lifetime, the fact is how I am not fair Laura Kohl, I am the Laura Kohl who went to Human Beings' Shrine, who kept Human Beings' Shrine and who continues to boot butt, she says. It's so lot a portion of me. I am who I am since I kept Human Beings' Shrine. It drives me each date. Down there's no closing for Jonestown, it's not fixable, she says. I could loathe Jim Jones but later so which? He already dead. Down there's no spot in residing in hate. Instead of, I bring up human beings on cults. I say a lot on manufacturing yours own decisions. Many decades on, the Saturday's monument will give several survivors and their loved ones along for the At First period. We are one big unsuccessful household. It doesn't question if you were someone who had a litigation versus Jim Jones or someone down there the recent date, we were survivors and we done it via, she says. We are there 40 years after and house thing to commemorate. Occasionally while we collect, human beings say or we chant songs. It's a holy period and area. We overlook how down there is else planet, Laura says. All of us survivors shaw we can do it out of Jim Jones, and he is not skipped. Currently I include sorrow how I lose nice friends, I'm sad how several of the top human beings I always knew in my lifetime, human beings who were devoted so lot how they later lose their lives. I saw an completely fabulous society of all races, all backgrounds, all socio-economic levels and we did a skillful job creation the society for 1,000 human beings, she says. How type of society can already exist, it did not rely on Jim Jones, it depended on very devoted human beings how gives me a lot of expect, it instills trust how beautiful human beings can do beautiful things. I am yet an militant currently. I aware we can do a distinction, I saw it, and I don't offer upwards. All photographic copyright law.